It's been described as the biggest gamble of Donald Trump's second term so far. Overnight, the U.S. president's long-threatened tariffs against its biggest trading partners, Canada and Mexico, kicked in. The move has spooked markets and raised fears of a global trade war. Goods from both countries will now be slapped with a 25% levy. An existing 10% tax on Chinese imports has also been doubled. Now, in response, Canada has already imposed tariffs on some goods imported from the U.S., with the Canadian Prime Minister delivering this stark message.
The United States launched a trade war against Canada, their closest partner and ally, their closest friend. I want to speak first directly to the American people. We don't want this. We want to work with you as a friend and ally. And we don't want to see you hurt either. But your government has chosen to do this to you. And now, to my fellow Canadians, I won't sugarcoat it. This is going to be tough, even though we're all going to pull together, because that's what we do.
Now, Trump took to his Truth Social platform saying, please explain to Governor Trudeau of Canada that when he puts on a retaliatory tariff on the U.S., our reciprocal tariff will immediately increase by a like amount. All three countries have reacted angrily, and global stock markets tumbled as the tit-for-tat tariffs spark fears of a trade war.
US President Donald Trump announced the tariffs a month ago. Now they're being implemented. He says the goal is to bring production back to the United States.
25% on Canada and 25% on Mexico, and that'll start. So they're going to have a tariff. So what they have to do is build their car plants, frankly, and other things in the United States, in which case they have no tariffs.
Mexico's president was quick to condemn the tariffs, but also stressed she did not want to spark a trade war.
It is by no means our purpose to start an economic or trade confrontation, which unfortunately and regrettably is the opposite of what we should be doing, that is, integrating our economies more to strengthen our region. Nobody wins with this decision. On the contrary, it affects the people we represent.
The Canadian Prime Minister was more combative with his response, saying the US had already launched a trade war against its closest ally.
Canadians are reasonable, and we are polite, but we will not back down from a fight. Not when our country and the well-being of everyone in it is at stake. Canada will be implementing 25% tariffs against $155 billion worth of American goods.
The US has also placed tariffs on Chinese goods. 20%, up from 10%. China is retaliating with levies on US agricultural products, including pork, poultry, milk, and soy.
We advise our American partners to put aside their bullying demeanour and return to the rightful path of dialogue and cooperation soon.
China, Canada, and Mexico are America's three largest trading partners. Their economies are tightly interwoven. The retaliatory tariffs will make US goods more expensive and ramp up inflation. Despite warnings from business and economists, Trump is sticking to his policy. And he's threatening to go even further by levying tariffs on European goods.
Let's turn to Korte. He's a business correspondent based in New York, and I'm assuming very busy today. We're already seeing retaliatory tariffs from Canada and China. Mexico's promising to announce their countermeasures over the weekend. And now Donald Trump is saying he'll impose a second round of tariffs on Canada. How much further could this go? Are we bound to see the spiral out of control?
Yeah, a lot can still happen at this point, Nicole. I mean, we're hearing from the White House that if Canada is imposing tariffs, so those will be added on, so to speak, to the bill of Canada. But we're also hearing that maybe it's not a given, but maybe there could be even more tariffs next week on steel and aluminum imports. And then there's also the big one out. So the big date is April 2nd. So we could see a reciprocal tariffs against a lot of countries, also against the European Union, against countries like Germany or also Switzerland. So this whole story, its development is very dynamic.
Dynamic and quite a gamble, isn't it? What are the economic risks of imposing these tariffs, not only to the countries involved, but to the entire world?
Yeah, well, I mean, investor Warren Buffett, he put it nicely over the weekend. I mean, he said it's a bill that's not going to be paid by the tooth fairy. So it could have implications for the U.S. Economy. We could see inflationary pressures. We could see that prices here in the United States will increase. And that at a time when consumption is already stressed with pretty high prices. We just saw it recently that consumer sentiment dropped by the highest margin in about 4 years. We see consumer spending also down quite a bit. And then if you look at other countries, Germany, but other countries as well, the US is the biggest trading partner. And with those tariffs, that could actually be a burden on those economies where the US is the biggest or one of the biggest trading partners on the world.
Donald Trump is also threatening to impose tariffs on EU goods, of course. How should the bloc be preparing for this?
Yeah, well, I mean, what they're probably going to do is that they will also come up with countermeasures, and then we will see. But overall, the EU probably depends more on the United States than the other way around. And that's actually the card that the Trump administration is trying to play, that they're using their economic strengths, that they're using the strengths of the US market to somehow put pressure on the EU bloc, on other countries to get better trade deals.
That was Jens Korte, business correspondent based in New York. Thanks so much for all of that. Abigail Hall is an associate professor of economics at the University of Tampa in Florida. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, Canada's prime minister thinks these tariffs are a very dumb thing to do. Would you agree?
I have to say that I agree with the Canadian Prime Minister's assessment in terms of tariffs. Economists very largely agree across the board, regardless of their political affiliation or ideology, that tariffs are harmful. And they're not just harmful on the countries on which they are being imposed, but they are also harmful on the countries who are imposing them.
Canada will be implementing.
In what way will the American people and American manufacturers, all those people that Donald Trump says he's doing this for, feel the consequences of these tariffs that are now coming into effect? And it looks like things are only just getting started. We might be looking at a full-blown global trade war here.
Yeah, this does not look positive in terms of global trade relations. And we've anticipated this for a few weeks now, even with the pause on the tariffs with Canada and Mexico. But as you mentioned, it looks like this could just be the beginning. For consumers, individuals within the United States can expect to see prices rise for any good that is imported from the countries on which we have implemented tariffs. And as was mentioned earlier, the Canada, Mexico, and China are the U.S.'s 3 largest trading partners. And so we're talking about a lot of different goods. So these things are going to be more expensive. On the producer side, for U.S. companies that are either attached to foreign producers or who use imported goods in their production processes, they're also going to see their cost rise, which ultimately get passed on in part or in whole to consumers.
How do you expect Donald Trump to sell this to Americans who are already struggling to make ends meet?
The way that this has been discussed in a political environment is that tariffs are a way of leveling the economic playing field. Trump, in his campaign, as well as in his inaugural address, reiterated his idea that he wants to replace U.S. income tax with tariff revenue. But the reality of that situation is that tariffs for a very long time have not been a good revenue generating mechanism for the U.S. government. And I don't anticipate any reason that that should change. At the end of the day, this is going to harm not only foreign consumers and foreign producers, but also American consumers and American producers. And how that comes up in terms of midterm elections, I think might be really interesting.
Donald Trump famously once said that tariffs was his favorite word in the world. Where do you think his fixation with levies comes from?
Again, I think that this has to do with the idea that he wants to replace U.S. income taxes with tariffs. And tariffs, if you're not familiar with how they work, they sound really good to the uninitiated. So we, in the case of the United States, will make foreign companies or foreign governments, whoever we're talking about, they're going to be on the hook for this tariff at the or to the benefit of U.S. consumers or U.S. companies. But this really misses the fundamental point about what tariffs are. At the end of the day, tariffs are just another form of taxes. And just like any other tax, consumers and producers are going to pay the price. And it's not just foreign producers and foreign consumers, but domestic entities as well.
You mentioned the midterms, 2026. Could this gamble backfire politically? Because a lot of people who voted for Trump did so because they trusted him on the economy. Briefly, if you can.
So I think that it could potentially impact midterm elections to the extent, especially that people see prices rise. I don't anticipate we're going to see prices rising right away. So it's not as though U.S. consumers are going to wake up tomorrow morning and the price of, say, agricultural products is going to suddenly have jumped overnight. But if we're looking down the road 6 months from now or a year from now, we can expect to see higher prices. And if people vote with their wallet, it could make a difference.
Abigail Hall of the University of Tampa, thank you so much for all those insights.
My pleasure.